Welcome back to the Media7 special from the Webstock conference in Wellington. I'm talking to Instapaper founder Marco Amont and Fire Eagle developer Tom Coates. And we're joined now by the founder of independent news website scoop.co.nz, Alistair Thompson. Welcome, Alistair. Now, when America Online announced recently that it was to acquire the Huffington Post for $315 million, it was buying not so much a news website as a finely tooled machine for generating audiences. 250 million unique viewers a month, in fact, sometimes with complete rubbish. When traditional news and content organisations struggle to turn the dollar online, is this the future? Alistair, what do you make of the Huffington Post sale? Is it really worth 315 million?
I was somewhat surprised at it, but I mean it probably is in terms of just being a huge aggregator of traffic and a huge audience. It's going to be very interesting how it pans out because it was a very liberal blogging. I mean, the production staff are essentially free, unpaid bloggers, and it will be very interesting to see how they react to it because they come from a sort of the more rebellious end of the web, if you like.
Yeah, and well, as does your site, to be honest.
Yes.
You also aggregate a great deal of content, much of it free. Are we seeing with the blogger protests about this that when a site that uses a lot of free content cashes up, people get unhappy because they feel they should be paid? I mean, is that a problem? Do they have a right to feel that way?
Well, people have quite loudly said that they don't because it was a business and it was always a business and it employs a couple hundred people or something. But I think there is a respect to your audience issue involved. And in the case of the Huffington Post, its particular position within the structure was quite unusual. The Huffington founder, Ariana, has come back and said, look, this is a way of generating additional traffic for the people who also have their own blogs, and it's a way of them generating traffic to their own blogs. And I think that's true. So I think that it's quite important to realise that there's still value being generated for some of those bloggers. And
that value all comes from, at the moment, display advertising. Is that still the only practical way to fund online news?
At present it is, although we've seen the launch of Google OnePass, which is really a huge new development in the sense that it's a toolkit essentially to enable website proprietors to put in place their own paywalls. And if it's implemented in the same excellent way most Google technology seems to be, then it is quite possibly going to be a bit of a game changer in enabling sites even like your own potentially to put up discriminating paywalls which only try and charge corporate audiences potentially.
And of course this comes a week after Apple has released a new system for clipping the ticket on magazine and newspaper subscriptions on the iPad.
Yeah, so Apple's announced that they're going to take 30% of any revenue that's earned from any application which comes sold through the application store, and any payments which are processed through it, which is possibly a dangerous move. But I mean, I think what we're seeing is we're starting to see some of the new technologies which are going to start financing news emerging, and a bit of a war starting. Do you buy that, Tom? Are we entering the age of the paywall?
No, I don't buy that for a minute. I think there's a number of things going on here. One of them, the Apple thing, is particularly interesting in the sense that it's not obviously all the revenue; it's just the subscription revenue. But the thing they're saying, the big difference between them and Google, is they're saying they won't share users' home addresses and names with the publishers unless the user opts in. And that's where the publishers get quite a lot of money through direct advertising and sales. So that's the big shift between it, because Google say they're quite happy to do it. If you sign up for this thing, they'll just send the publisher information about you. Now, I think that's going to be an interesting battle to see in public. The publishers are going to like Google. The users may not. The users may stick with Apple on that one. I think the more general, large-scale, important thing that's going on is this sort of shakeout of news. And for me, I think the big startling shock that the news industry is dealing with is just simply one of oversupply. Every newspaper on the planet, every English-speaking newspaper, is now in competition with every other English-speaking newspaper on the planet. The amount of money and revenue that's available through advertising on the web for newspapers is, less than they're used to, and they're all competing for it. If you want to support a large newsroom, then there's essentially costs associated with that. And so it just seems to me that we're entering a period where a large proportion of standard news organisations are just going to have to consolidate and go bust.
I wonder if this is the same thing we're seeing with other kinds of content, though, isn't it? I mean, YouTube supposedly does revenue sharing, but the cold hard fact is there's just not enough revenue to meaningfully share around. There's so much advertising inventory chasing too little dollars.
Yeah, I think I think one of the big lessons we've learned from the web over the last 10 to 15 years, not necessarily a lesson we wanted to learn, is that there are certain businesses in which scale becomes all important. And if you are larger than everyone else, then you can survive and thrive. And if you're not, you can't. 10 years ago, we would have been having arguments about e-commerce, and we'd have been saying, is e-commerce ever going to be a thing that can make anyone any money? We were in that moment. And then what happened as a result of that was probably, 50% of all e-commerce goes through Amazon. One company that's managed to do it at such scale.
And there is one big auction company.
eBay, yeah. And the reason
Not
is...
New Zealand, though. There's trade in New
it's actually
Zealand,
interesting. Auction companies are particularly interesting because it's all about the number of auctions that happen in that area. So if you were there first in Germany, then eBay don't have penetration. They can't win. But any place where you're the auction company that's there first and largest, you'll win, because essentially people go to the site with the best auctions. Now at the moment we're almost the other way around for news. Like you're seeing that there were like 40 auction companies, in every place on the planet, and they're all fighting frantically.
And in your view, that can't last?
No, I think it's absolutely. I think pretty much everything we don't like about news, the way news is going at the moment, is directly related to this situation.
Right.
The fact
I
that,
need to bring in Marco here, because you're in quite an interesting position. You're facilitating reading on the internet. You're kind of one of the, via Instapaper, one of the champions of the so-called long read. And yet, I think great service, and then I think as a web publisher, but you're taking my content away from my advertising. Do you get that feedback from publishers?
Never, no. Because the reality is the way Instapaper works mechanically is that you view the page first, and then you click read later. And oftentimes you've already started reading the story before clicking that. And if you look at the average amount of time somebody spends on a page normally before they hit back or close the tab or for whatever reason leave that page, and then you see how long people take to hit the read later button, it's about the same. So realistically, people are still seeing the ads at about the same rate, and what Instapaper is really doing is kind of automating what people previously did with the print button or with the save as feature.
Is it going to stay on the model it is? It doesn't cost anyone any money to use. I pay for your Instapaper app for my iPad on the App Store. Or are there ways to use that horrible word to monetize what's going on there?
It's very simple. The majority of the monetization is from the app because it's very easy to sell an app on the App Store. And then there's also a small ad on the Instapaper site in your list of articles. And then there's also a monthly subscription that people can optionally buy that currently does nothing, but for some reason people buy it.
Nice. Alistair, I wonder whether there's a sense in which the advertising industry itself has to step up here. Because there doesn't seem to have been any solution to showing me an appropriate ad if I go and look at the Guardian website as a New Zealander. It really doesn't work. I see the ad network's logo. I don't see the ads. Why has this taken so long for the industry to sort out?
I think that there's a problem that both the advertising industry and the online and the offline media have both hated the internet so much because it's disrupting what they're doing that they just haven't done it very well. So I sort of live in hope that the advertising industry and the online media industry will get it together in that regard. One of the things Tom was saying about scale is very interesting because I think that in that regard, New Zealand is just not big enough to ever achieve scale in news, and so it's true about global news that there needs to be probably a bit of a shakedown. But how do you finance news in smaller jurisdictions? And in terms of the question of that, I think that what Marco was just saying about people paying for something when they don't have to, I think that whole, which is also what Amanda was saying about music, I think that the combination of paywalls plus the ability, offering people the ability to pay for things in easy ways, which I think is one of the really good things about Google OnePass, people will trust it, is that it will enable revenue to start to be earned by these organisations.
Do you think it's going to help an organisation like The Guardian, which on one hand is I think, genuinely innovating in the way it tells stories, and it has become, you know, one of the great successes of internet publishing, but others losing tens of millions of pounds a year. Will that go on, or do you think things will come back to some sort of equilibrium?
I think at the moment we're living in a quite strange period where publications like The Guardian and The New York Times are spending so much money on doing such a fantastically brilliant job of what they do that they're losing money. I suspect that they could probably quite easily stop losing money if they just didn't spend quite so much money on doing it quite so well.
So the news needs to be less good. That's kind of depressing. Well, thank you, Marco Amont, Tom Coates and Alistair Thompson. Thanks also to Amanda Palmer, Peter Sunder and Doug Bowman. And thanks to you for watching. We'll be back with Media7 at the same time next week. But before we go, here's Amanda Palmer to play us out with the song we talked about earlier, Map of Tasmania.
Map of Tasmania.